Next, from the City Club of Chicago, Illinois Commerce Commission Director Doug Scott talks about his agency's regulation of Illinois utilities and businesses. Director Scott also talks about the balance between proper regulation and encouraging economic development. This runs about 30 minutes.
Thanks very much, Jay. Good afternoon. It's great to be back with you again. I appreciate the invitations to come back periodically and talk in all of the different jobs that I've had. I think I've been able to speak to the City Club in all of them. It's always a pleasure to be here. And Jay, thanks so much for all the good work that you do, not just for the City Club, but also for Misericordia and for the Special Olympics and all of the other charities that you give so much time and energy to. We really appreciate that. And Dr. Green, always good to see you. He used to come out and talk to me about township issues when I was a legislator. And so we've always had a lot of good conversations over the years. He's very busy this time of year. There's rumor that there's an election coming up, and Dr. Green is he's busier than Mel Kiper around NFL draft time, but with slightly different hair too. But generally, persons in my position, Ed will recognize this, have to give this great long disclaimer about what evidence we consider and all of that. I'm not going to do that for you today. My thoughts are, however, my own. I will give you that disclaimer. If you've seen any of our ICC meetings, that shouldn't be difficult to convince you I'm not speaking on behalf of the ICC all of the time. And I'm going to end up spending my time today talking about a couple of issues. One that's happening right now and in very large numbers, probably affects a great number of people in the room, if not almost everybody in the room, and is slightly more entertaining than towing or repo contractors or some of the other things that we regulate at the ICC. But I'm going to talk a little bit about retail competition and municipal aggregation, which are issues that are very important right now, and especially as the city of Chicago is talking about moving into that. And then spend just a couple of minutes talking about kind of an issue that is on our mind, but is more of a longer range issue and involves actually lots of different parts of not just state government, but other entities as well, both private and not-for-profit. One thing I can't talk about today is the ComEd and the smart grid and those cases. If you had heard my long disclaimer that I didn't give, it would talk about how we can't talk about cases that are on open docket. That's one. The Ameren case was just decided, but is still subject to rehearing in certain parts, and so those are cases that I can't really talk about right now. I know that Ann Pramaggiore is going to come in November, I believe, sometime and talk, and maybe you can have me back after that sometime when I can talk about those issues, and we can talk about it, because there's really some very interesting things there, as a lot of you know. But I want to talk about retail competition, which, as a lot of you know, has taken off by leaps and bounds in Illinois. Just a kind of a quick review. It started in the mid-90s. In fact, Dave Fine from Exelon, where did Dave go? There he is, near the back, reminded me this is the 13th anniversary today of retail choice in Illinois. I know all of you celebrated that accordingly in the proper way. But we'll celebrate it a little bit by talking about it for the next couple of minutes, because we really are, if you start to go to conferences and you talk to my counterparts in other states, the states that have adopted competition, Illinois is quickly becoming a real model of customer choice, and it happening in a big way. And so a lot of people have got their eyes on Illinois to try to find out how some of these things are going to work here in the state. Retail choice started as a grand concept. There was this small little company based in Houston that was going to change the world back in the early and mid-90s. They sort of did for a while, not in the way that they anticipated doing that. But Enron was talking about going to different states and talking about wanting to introduce choice into the marketplace. And they went to lots of state legislatures. Ours was one of the states that actually worked on it and passed legislation back in the mid-90s to actually restructure the electric industry here. As you know, generation, distribution, transmission are basically the three parts of electric service. And generation and distribution up until the mid-90s, late 90s, were both regulated by the ICC. Now we just have the distribution portion of that. The generation you can buy from anybody, and anybody that gets certified to operate here in the state. It started off incredibly slowly on the residential level, and it probably did based on two factors. One is, as soon as we passed the law, we also passed a rate cut of 20% at the time, and then put a rate freeze in for 10 years. And so people who were interested in coming into the state and in selling electricity as an alternative supplier didn't come. I mean, that wasn't something that they did. They worked on the commercial and the industrial side. That took off, and that's worked out very well over the years, building up, and many commercial and industrial consumers now have a different supplier of electricity. But residential, it didn't really work so well. Once the rate freeze came off, and there were a couple of other legislative changes that were done to make it easier for the companies to operate, the alternative companies to operate here, and that really only happened within the last couple of years. It's really taken off. Now we've got several dozen alternative energy suppliers here in the state. You've seen them on billboards, you've heard them on the radio, they've probably called you or mailed you something or knocked on your door perhaps. And just to give you an idea of how the numbers have changed and the number of people who have switched over to an alternative supplier, and I won't give you too many numbers. Two things about speaking at lunch. One is you don't do a lot of numbers right after people ate because heads start hitting the table. The other thing I learned when I was at EPA is you never talk about wastewater treatment plants right after lunch. So I won't do either one of those things for you today, but I do want to give you a couple numbers because they're fairly dramatic. In March of 2011, at the end of March of 2011, so we're talking about, what, about 18 months ago, there were 2,034 residential consumers who were using an alternative supplier. The current number today that I pulled off of pluginillinois.org website, which is our website that we operate to talk about retail choice, in those 18 months we went from 2,034 to 1,012,505 residential customers. That's the number of people in the last 18 months that have switched to an alternative supplier. Now, price has been the main driver of that, people offering a number of different prices that are out there. But the really main driver has been the municipal aggregation. It's been cities voting, deciding that they want to band together and use their purchasing power together to look for an alternative supplier. That came through legislation in 2009. As a former mayor, it's fascinating to me to watch how municipal aggregation has played out in the state and to see how it will continue to do that. It started a little slowly. People weren't quite sure of how to do that for various reasons, not necessarily how to do it, but whether or not to do that. You've probably, maybe in a community that's done this already or in a community that's talking about it. If the community votes by referendum to allow the municipal leaders or it could be a township, it could be a county, it doesn't have to just be a municipality, but to let the leaders of the unit of government negotiate for them to try to get a better price from one of the suppliers, then an RFP can be issued and there's a process to do that. And we started with just a handful of municipalities, but what happened, the price breaks the difference if myself as an individual was just calling up one of the suppliers or a number of the different suppliers and shopping around, I could find 10, 15, maybe even 20% difference between the price that was offered by the incumbent and the alternative. With municipal aggregation, we've seen prices as high as 40% difference from the incumbent. And so what's happened is after that first set of contracts started getting done, this March we ended up with 300 different units of local government that had a referendum. Well over 200 of those passed. They're implementing their contracts now, and that's where you're seeing these huge numbers change. Again, we're seeing numbers of up to 40% reduction in rates, which has also led to the next wave of cities who are doing that. In the election next month, we've got a number of cities who are going to have referenda again, and some cities who had actually voted it down once, not allowed their units of government to do that, are now going either back for a second try at it and going to have another referendum, or doing the other way, which is, and I'll explain this, an opt-in program. In an opt-out program, and some of you may have experienced this, if I'm in a municipality and we vote by referendum to allow our government to negotiate a contract, and they negotiate a contract, I as an individual can opt out of that. I can say, yes, I see the rate that everybody in the community is getting, but I'd rather go to a different supplier. I'd rather shop to a different supplier. That's an opt-out program. And the prices have been very good because virtually everybody starts in the program. An opt-in program would be negotiate a rate, and then anybody in that community could then opt in and choose that rate. We haven't seen a lot of that now. We're going to start to see that in this next wave, and we'll see what that does for prices as well. Now, obviously, there's a huge game changer here as well in terms of numbers, because the city of Chicago has their referenda up in November as well, and obviously with the number of customers that are there, that'll be something obviously to keep our eye on as well. There are a few interesting issues with this in no particular order. One is I want to see what happens with the next wave of contracts. And I know there are some alternative suppliers that are in the room today, and they've heard me make these comments before, but this one has been primarily about price. And if you're getting that kind of price differential, that makes sense that that's the driver behind the contracts. But what happens on the next round of these contracts? If the price differential starts to shrink, and we're assuming that that's what's going to happen, what ends up happening next? What are some of the other ways that customers can be enticed to switch, or what are some of the other ways that municipalities, some of the things that they can negotiate through their RFP process? Some of that could be green power. We know there's one company that offers 100% green power. EPA guy, Paul, I had to get that in, of course. But there are several of the different companies that are working here in Illinois that offer a partial green package, so power that comes from wind or from solar or other renewable sources or other clean sources of energy. The smart grid, and again, I can't talk about the docketed parts of this, but when that happens, you can have more customer-centric plans, understanding better what the load is at different times, what the power usage is at different times, and different communities could structure different packages based on that as well. Some states have interesting packages, like one company in one of the southwestern states actually offers Saturdays free, for example. Your power usage on Saturdays would be free. Different communities have, that's a neat concept, isn't it? Something to think about. But opt-out penalties have been part of that. For those of you who may have switched before, you may see companies that charge a fee if you want to then switch away from them. A lot of those have been negotiated out through the RFP process and municipal aggregation. It'd be interesting to see if those stay out of the contracts going on. And a lot of consultants in this business as well, helping the municipalities get through this first round as we move forward, and the municipalities have done it once, having operated a fairly large municipality for a few years and been an attorney for one for several more. I can tell you that a lot of the cities are going to want to do that on their own then, and so some of the roles of the consultants may be a little less than they were before. So with retail competition, there's a few issues that are out there that we have to pay attention to, in addition to licensing the folks who can actually sell power to you. One is the marketing techniques. There are probably a lot of people in this room that have some very interesting stories about some of the marketing techniques that were there. A lot of that has to do with some of the door-to-door marketing that's out there. There's also telemarketing and mail. My favorite story is a person, door-to-door marketer, went up to a person's house, and the person, unfortunately for the marketer, the person happened to know a lot about this subject, having worked for the ICC for a time and been engaged in the energy industry for many, many years. So he kept him going, talking about the different things, the different products that they had, and was talking about the green part of it, and said that if this gentleman would sign up with a program, he would guarantee that he would take all of the carbon monoxide out of his power. A darn good thing if you can guarantee it, but probably not accurate, and not and certainly not what the company was sending this person out there to say. So those are issues that we've got to keep track of. We keep on our website, on the plugin illinois.org, a customer complaint scorecard that can show you how every company stacks up in terms of customer complaints relative to the other folks. Some have a lot of customers, some have relatively few. So by percentage of complaints with their customers, they're ranked, and so that will give the customer. Obviously, we don't advocate for any particular company, but we're trying to give people as much information as we can about the companies that are out there. The other interesting thing that we're starting to see is that in the places that have already aggregated, in the communities where they've already aggregated their power, we're starting to see some complaints arise of people that are saying we're from the new company and they're not. Or they're saying, telling them some things about the municipal aggregation that may not necessarily be the case. On the other side, we've also seen some mayors who are discouraging people from going in and marketing in their communities because they're happy with what they've done what they've negotiated as a community. That's not right either. Everybody in an opt-out program, everybody has the ability to opt out. If they want to choose to go to something different than what the city negotiated for them, they can do that. So those are all things that we're keeping our eye on there. So these are all issues that are, like I say, there may be, I would be willing to bet, given the numbers that we're seeing, a large number of the people in this room are in a community that's done that, or maybe you've done that yourself. Decide to switch to a different supplier, and obviously we're keeping an eye on that. It's very, very difficult. People sometimes don't want to switch. We run into a lot of questions, and so we're coming out now with a fact sheet, not only about retail choice, but municipal aggregation, to let people know some of the things. Folks have legitimate concerns. Well, if I don't buy my power from ComEd or Ameren, depending on where in the state I'm from, and the power goes out, I'll end up in the back of the line. They won't want to restore my power. And of course, we have to assure folks that's not the case. That's not how it works. ComEd, Ameren are going out of their way to talk to folks about how all of this works as well. They're still responsible for the distribution part. If you're still buying your power through ComEd, that's a pass-through charge for them. Whatever they pay for the power, they pass on to the customers. So the incumbents, just want to make sure they're delivering the power to the customers. But you've got to kind of get people through some of these issues that they've got in their mind sometimes. And I think that once people switch the first time, kind of like phone plans or other things. An interesting fact: back when Senator Dillard and Senator Jones and the rest of us were debating this bill back in the 90s. At that time, hard enough to believe, but more than half the people at that time, where competition had been in place in the telecommunications industry for years, at that time more than half the people not only hadn't switched to a different company, they hadn't even switched to a better plan that was available from their own company. They were just used to the plan that they had. It was something that they didn't want to switch. They were a little bit afraid of that. But now, obviously, everybody's got a different plan. Everybody's comparing, I got this many minutes, I get this many services. And as the technology for the phones have changed, the plans have had to keep up with that. And so people have gotten more comfortable with it. I think you're going to start to see that as well on the electric side. So that's what's happening with that issue. But to me, there's one fascinating issue I just want to spend a couple of minutes with before we get to the several volumes of questions that Dr. Green has collected here for me. This is going to play out over time, and that's how we're going to make sure that there's enough energy in the future. An incredibly important issue. As you know, we can do all that we can about having the right number of companies there, but somebody's still got to produce all of that power, or we've got to figure out ways to not use as much power in the alternative. Interviewers always like to ask people, like me, what keeps you up at night, and I try not to sleep until I absolutely have to, so I'm probably not the right person to ask about that. But something that does give me pause, even more so than the Cubs starting pitching or the Bears left tackle situation, is how do we ensure the energy future? It's not directly in the ICC's bailiwick. As I said, we talk about distribution issues and transmission issues, but the generation issues are not as part of our direct regulation, but it's obviously very important to us. In other states that haven't gone to competition, everything comes through the commission. So if you're a power company and you want to build a new power plant, you actually have to go to their version of the ICC and actually get approval to do that. And the commission has to decide that not only is the power needed to be built in that location, but the costs that you're incurring to do that are reasonable and prudent. We don't get to make that decision here, but that also means that we don't get a direct a direct tie-in to the power that is generated here in the state. And so it's obviously something that we need to keep an eye on. I know the legislature does, the IPA does as well as the governor's office, certainly, the energy office, and others. And what will our fuel mix look like in the next 20 years or so? Our mix right now for the non-renewable portion of our fuel mixture is about half nuclear power and half traditional coal-fired power plants. Now, I'm not exactly sure what it's going to look like in 2030, but I can almost guarantee it's not going to look like that. So we have to start to think about what our power mix is going to be. Illinois has a very good renewable portfolio standard. We're really heavy on wind, and we've been one of the leaders over the last several years in developing wind energy in the state, solar to a lesser degree, but we have some statutory provisions for that as well. There is an issue there with aggregation. It's actually hurting the funding source for the renewable energy sources that we may need some legislative action to address. We've got very strong energy efficiency goals here in the state as well, but we can also do more in that. I was told one time that the best kilowatt hour is the one that we don't use, and for a lot of respects that's right. When you think about it both in terms of cost, in terms of environmental consequences and issues, that's something that's certainly true. So as we start to look at things like the smart grid and we get better information about what our energy usage is, and people are able to do audits for us and tell us what our usage is and how we can save more, and we do better in terms of lighting and appliances and all of the issues that you're very familiar with, that really provides for some additional energy efficiency opportunities. Also through things like demand response, where during peak times, the power company, you can work out an arrangement with the power company where they can actually cycle your power down or even off in certain respects for a little while and then bring it back up. That amount of peak time shaving really helps tremendously, both in terms of the costs that are involved and in not having to produce all of this extra power, which is very, very expensive during the peak times and actually can help everybody. Distributed generation. We've seen it a lot with schools. We've seen it a lot with other public buildings. They're doing their own geothermal system or their own windmill or their own solar facility. How does all of that fit into the mix? How much of that are we going to be able to have? And from a distribution system, what are the things that we need to be aware of so that the companies like ComEd and Ameren, who have to recover their fixed costs for being able to have power available, how do we make sure that we're compensating them fairly and doing that so it's fair to the ratepayers as well. So there are a lot of issues that are involved in this, not just studying it, but actually trying to work and make sure that we're doing the best that we can to integrate more renewables and do more energy efficiency. And as I said, it may need some legislative and or regulatory rules to accomplish that. We certainly know the legislature is interested. We've had a number of the kind of projects where the legislature's been looking at this issue and has tried to develop funding programs for projects that would be generating some new power. Some of them have, none of them have come online as of yet. The one that is really still going fairly well is the Future Gen program. That's got a big support from the Department of Energy. That's designed to see if we can use coal, keep the coal cleaned up, take the greenhouse gases out of that, sequester the carbon into the ground, use some pipelining to do that. Has some very good possibilities. I mean, these things are not just issues in terms of power and power generation. These are also jobs issues, and coal is a major economic driver in the southern part of Illinois. And if we're able to do those kinds of things and find a different use for coal that can meet all the new EPA regulations and to do it economically and meet the challenge that the coal industry faces from lower and lower natural gas prices, those are the kinds of things that we're all going to have to explore together. So I think there are a multitude of issues that are related to that. I think from a technological standpoint, there's a lot of work being done, and a lot of new things will be coming on the horizon that will allow us to take more and better looks at this to try to make sure that we're doing all that we can to ensure that we've got the right power at the right cost for the customers for years in the future. So that's all I wanted to say about those two issues. I appreciate your patience and look forward to Paul's questions. Thanks, everybody.
I have a number of questions, most of which I just realized I can't answer. I mean, I can't ask or answer. But before we start, we skip somebody. The pride and joy of Palatine, Senator Matt Murphy. There he is. Well, you will be Mr. Veto, all right? This deals with the grid modernization program. Veto?
That's going to be tough. Well, it depends what they ask. But
all right. Eric Bergstrom, HBK Engineering. Where are you, Eric? There you go. If this ruling stands and is not overturned at rehearing, the grid
that one I can veto.
Jeff.
And just so I can explain it, without going through the whole disclaimer I said I wouldn't do for you, our decisions and everything that we do, and this was a hard thing for me to get to know because I was a political person for a lot of years. I was a state representative. I was a mayor. I was a head of the EPA for a long time. Our job there is to look at problems and sit down with everybody in the room and try to figure out the right solution for them. This job's different. This job is they call it quasi-judicial. It's more like a judge, and so on decisions, the only thing that I can take into account are actual things that come onto us and the record when all the parties are present, just like you would in a trial. And so the letters you send me on this particular issue or on others, for those of you who have been so kind to write on this issue, I have to disclose as an ex-party communication and show everybody that I got this, and unless it came about as part of the actual hearing process, it's not something that I'm supposed to consider, and that's why, unfortunately, in a setting like this, I can't talk about those particular issues. But on a normal rate case, just so folks know, because there's a lot of mystery about what the ICC does. In a normal rate case, we've got two goals in mind. We have two affirmative things that we have to do. One is we want to make sure that whatever the service that's being provided, whether that's Illinois American providing water in a particular place, or whether it's ComEd providing distribution services for electricity, or one of the gas companies, we're supposed to do two things. One, we're supposed to balance the interest of the company in being able to provide that service. In other words, we don't want to come up with a ruling that wouldn't allow the company to recover their costs and be able to do what they're supposed to do. But the second part of that equation, which is equally as important, is on behalf of the customer, and that's to make sure that all of the expenses that are claimed to be recoverable by the companies are in accordance with the law and are done in a way so that they're minimizing the impact on the customers. And so that's the balance that we go through when we look at all that evidence that's derived in any particular case. That's the work that we do and the balance that we try to strike.
Keep your veto comments, a little shorter. Oh, you'll like this one, Skinny. From Shefsky and Freilich, John F. Kennedy. Where are you? All right. What role do you see FutureGen playing in the competitive market? Can you answer that one?
I can answer that.
There you go. All right.
FutureGen is an interesting project. I talked about it briefly. The Department of Energy looking for kind of next generation technology projects. FutureGen being one that Illinois won a competition with other sites throughout the country, most notably with Texas, to get this project funded. And what it's designed to do, at first it was designed to build a brand new plant using kind of the latest in coal-fired technology, and then to sequester right immediately below the plant all of the carbon that was generated, the CO2 that was generated from the plant. It's changed now. The second iteration of it, which is actually, we think, a little bit more interesting, is a retrofit of what had been an existing coal plant, pipelining the CO2 to a location and then sequestering it underground then. put your environmental hat on for a minute, it's an interesting project because you're retrofitting an old plant that's unused. You're looking at pipeline technology, which can be very important for things like getting oil out of the ground or getting natural gas out of the ground, what they call enhanced oil recovery at different sites, even in Illinois or in other places, which can make the economics of it obviously more important. And so from a technology, from an environmental standpoint, the project itself we think is very interesting and very important. The question becomes making it economical, and that's the brunt of John's question here, and that's a more difficult question. We've seen what's happened with natural gas prices to the customer's benefit here. That's a lot of what's driving some of the difference in what everybody's paying for the alternative sources of their power, because a lot of power that's generated by natural gas has become cheaper here lately. And so that's put a strain on coal plants, who also have some additional new U.S. Environmental Protection Agency regulations. FutureGen will meet all of those regulations. The question becomes, the question about it being a major player will be in terms of in the long run, what the economics of that are, and can it compete with the other sources of power that are out there? Because one of our responsibilities is to get, and the IPA's responsibility is to get the lowest cost power possible on the grid. So it's an open question.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.